Love you. Yeah, I love you.
You have a guy baby?
A girl baby.
Yeah.
For who?
For you.
Who's gonna have a baby?
You. So you can have a baby.
I'm your greatest despair, and I hope you'll be mine.
Alright, so this is the second half of my fourth video. When I last spoke to you guys, I advised that I would go into more detail about our NICU stay. So when Major was born, his lungs were good. They had gave me the 2 steroid shots to make his lungs develop faster. So when he came out, he was breathing on his own. However, they put a CPAP machine, kind of like what they use in adults when you have sleep apnea. So he had a CPAP machine. It went over his nose and over his mouth, and then it's strapped over his head into a hat, which is why he had a hat on all the time. He also had an IV in his foot, and then he had fobs on him that would track his oxygen. No, excuse me, that would track his heart rate, and he had an O2 fob on his toe, which would track his oxygen levels. So all of that, when we transferred him, all of that came with. About 10 days into our NICU stay, he was able to get the CPAP machine removed, which was an amazing day for us because we could finally see his whole face without that mask. Mind you, his face was probably this big, and he had a mask that went over his nose and mouth, and the straps was around his head, so you could see his eyes, but his eyes would swell from the extra fluid from the mask. So when we got that machine removed, I remember the day because I was counting down, and I was at home, and they had this camera. It was called NICView. NICVIEW, and you were assigned a password and a username, and you could see your baby at all times. The only time they would cover it or take it off is during care times, and care times are when they take the mask off, they wash his face, they clean out his eyes and his mouth, they switch the O2 sensor, they change his diaper and check his temperature, and they do his vitals. I remember logging in, as I did quite often. When I logged in, the mask was taken off his face, and the nurse wrote a note and put it beside his face, and she said, Major had his CPAP removed at, I think it said 8:10 a.m. and I cried and I cried, and I showed Gerald, and I showed Gerald's mom, and I showed my mom, and I was just so excited that he had that machine off. Although it didn't breathe for him. It would just push air into his lungs to make his lungs expand more. So that was a happy day, and I felt like this was just one step closer. This is mommy life, baby crying in the background. I felt like that was one step closer to us going home, us getting the heck out of that NICU and out of that hospital. So he did really well without the mask, one less machine and one less cord. And I was able to hug him and see his face and smell him and kiss his face, and he could open his eyes and look at me, and I could look at him. So that was a great day. A few days went by, and his oxygen would continue to drop. And they thought maybe it was a UTI, or it was reflux that was causing him to do that. but it ended up being that he simply just needed to rest, and he needed that CPAP machine back on. The day that the nurse told me that, I was on the phone and I just lost it. And I lost it on the way to the hospital. I was so upset I had to FaceTime my mom and just have her pray with me and pray for me and calm me down so that I can get out of my car and go into the hospital. And when I got into the hospital, the nurse was like, don't let this upset you. It happens and he will be okay. And I tried to put on this face that I was okay. So she called the doctor to let the doctor know what was going on. And as I'm holding him, I'm shaking because I can feel myself crying. I can feel it building up, but I didn't want to lose it in front of the nurse. Although I know she wouldn't have cared, and she's seen plenty of moms cry in the NICU. And as I'm holding him, his oxygen, it needed to stay above 92, and it was dropping like into the 70s. And I was so scared that I would keep patting him on the butt to kind of wake him up, to remind him, like, you need to breathe. You need to breathe for mommy. So when the doctor came in and she saw his stats and she saw how hard he was breathing, she said that he needed the CPAP machine. And they were going to take a urine sample and put the IV in him. And the nurse, I remember her saying, are you going to be okay to be in here? Because he's going to scream. And I already wasn't okay. Hell, I hadn't been okay for weeks. So no, I was not going to be okay with watching that happen to my baby again. So I said, no, I'm going to leave. And the doctor said, do you want to put him down or do you want me to take him? And I kind of did this motion like, just, you know, just take him. She took Major out my arms and I got up and I got my phone off the charger, and the room was probably about 20 feet long. From the time that I grabbed my phone to the time I got to the door, I let out this scream. And I don't know where it came from, and I wasn't, you know, prepared to scream. I wanted to get out the room, get off the floor, and then go cry in private. I cried all the way down the NICU room. When I got to the nurse's station, they had this parent room where there was like couches and TV and coffee and ice, and I just darted for that room, and I was crying so loud that one of the people at the desk came, and I remember crying so hard that I was covering my face and I was looking at the floor. You could see my tears all over the floor, and I remember her rubbing my back and telling me that you know, I wanted to give you your privacy, but I couldn't sit there and listen to you cry without making sure that you were okay. And I remember her asking what my name was, and I told her, and she told me her name, and then it had clicked that her mom was one of the nurses in labor and delivery that was prepping me for my induction. And when she prepped me for my induction, she said, I have a baby in the NICU too, and she's 18. And I was like, what? Like 18 months or 18 weeks? Like what? She said she's 18 years old and she's in nursing school and she works at the front desk. And the lady that was consoling me at the time was that daughter. So that was something that I could kind of smile about. And I told her, your mom told me about you. And she was like, you know, she tells everybody that she has an 18-year-old baby in the NICU. So I got through that, and when Gerald got there, he was able to get me calmed down, and we just waited because I told the nurse to come and get me when they were done because I didn't want to walk in as he was screaming. And when we got back, The mask was back on, the IV was back in, that machine was back, and he was just sleeping. And you could just tell that he needed that mask because his numbers were perfect, and he was just sleeping like he was just exhausted from trying to remember to breathe on his own. And they asked me if I wanted to hold him, and I said no. I just want to let him rest and let him, you know, relax. I don't want to upset him or agitate him anymore. So Gerald and I, we just sat in the room and we talked and we just watched him and we ate, and then we left for the night. That was one of 2 of the hardest days in the NICU, seeing my baby go back on a machine after we had celebrated him being off for all that time. Yeah, just thinking about it makes me sick to my stomach. But on the next video that I do, I want to tell you about the second worst day in the NICU. And to follow would be the phone call that we got to say that we can take him home. So thanks for hanging in with me. I know that I can be all over the place and get really emotional, but this is real, and this is my life, and this is what I had to go through to get to where we are now. So make sure to stay tuned and like, subscribe, and to share. Peace.